At some point in your awakening journey, perhaps following a profound spiritual realization or personal crisis, something fundamentally changed. You glimpsed the illusion, recognized the patterns, heard the noise, and then experienced silence. Initially, this felt powerful, even liberating. But gradually, that sense of purpose simply dissolved, not suddenly or dramatically, but quietly, as though your soul dimmed life's volume and never restored it. You ceased striving, ceased caring, not recklessly, but with that quiet existential resignation. The question grew increasingly persistent. Why do I feel so empty now that I finally perceived the truth? A peculiar paradox exists here. We anticipate spiritual awakening will fuel our enthusiasm. Yet for countless individuals, particularly the deeply reflective types, the empaths, the truth seekers, it produces the opposite effect. It depletes us. I recall a conversation with a friend, exceptionally intelligent, spiritually connected, devoted to all the essential texts, Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti. Following an intense awakening after her dark night of the soul, she understood. She claimed to have seen through the illusion of identity, ego, and the pursuit of external validation. Yet 2 months afterward, she lay staring at her ceiling, barely capable of rising from bed. She confessed, "I once agonized over insufficient achievement. Now I'm indifferent to accomplishing anything whatsoever. I expected awakening would illuminate me, not leave me like this." Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, identified this post-awakening haze decades ago. He didn't employ contemporary spiritual language, but he comprehended what occurs when the unconscious surfaces into consciousness. Jung observed, "Your ego hasn't disappeared. It is disoriented. It is lost its navigation system, and without new coordinates, motivation evaporates. So you haven't lost motivation or fallen into depression. You're simply suspended. You've awakened from something without yet awakening into something new." But here is where it becomes intriguing and profoundly misunderstood. What you're experiencing right now isn't failure. It is not clinical depression or anxiety. It is something ancient and sacred. Jung actually cautioned that modern society avoids this phase entirely, this sacred pause, this emptiness, this liminal space. He considered it essential for genuine individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self. But nobody mentions this part, do they? And that is precisely what we'll explore next. What is actually occurring in your psyche after awakening, and how this loss of motivation might be the most significant spiritual evolution you've ever experienced, if properly understood before continuing. If you're someone who enjoys expanding consciousness and exploring life's deeper dimensions, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. This channel exists to reveal the invisible and support those navigating the strange and transformative path of awakening. So if you've been drifting in that post-awakening haze, wondering where your vitality disappeared, understand this. You're not losing your mind. You're undergoing a psychological transformation most people cannot articulate. A shift so profound, it doesn't merely adjust your thinking, it rewrites your entire operating system. All those goals you previously pursued, the task lists, the long-term plans, the productivity mantras, they no longer inspire you. Not because you're failing, but because your motivation architecture itself is restructuring. And Carl Jung anticipated this long before it became social media discourse. Let's examine this closely. Throughout most of your life, your motivation originated from ego identity, the self you believed yourself to be, You wanted validation, visibility, success, love. That is not inherently problematic. It is simply how human development functions. Jung termed this the persona, the mask we adopt to navigate society. But awakening strips away the mask. Suddenly, you're not seeking approval, you're not competing, because you recognize the game, and that is where things become strange. Without the mask, your previous goals no longer fit. They were designed for a version of you that no longer exists. So now you're like an actor who stepped off stage and cannot remember their lines. That is why you feel unmotivated. You didn't lose drive. You transcended the fuel that powered it. Carl Jung believed we're not here to serve the ego. We're here to integrate it, to align it with something greater. He called this process individuation, the journey of transforming from fragmented identity into unified wholeness. Not the small self-seeking praise, but the self that transcends, the soul level center within you, connecting to everything. And this self doesn't concern itself with status, approval, or even clarity. It exists to express truth. So once awakening occurs, your psyche begins recalibrating. It starts rejecting anything inauthentic, forced, or ego-driven. That includes careers, relationships, ambitions, and even your meticulously crafted vision board from years past. That is why people often describe awakening as simultaneously liberating and disorienting. But Jung warned, if we stop here, we become stuck. Some people awaken and fall into spiritual bypassing, convincing themselves nothing matters, that everything is merely illusion. So they disconnect, drift, and numb themselves. They confuse detachment with disengagement. But the self desires something different. It wants to live through you. It wants to manifest the transcendent in this human form. It doesn't reject the world. It redefines your relationship to it. To step into that, you must traverse a peculiar middle phase Jung described perfectly, though few recognize it while experiencing it. There is a phase following awakening that rarely receives attention. It is not glamorous, and it doesn't generate social media engagement. It doesn't resemble meditating in scenic locations or posting profound insights. It looks like this: sitting in silence, unable to articulate yourself, while the world rushes past. Carl Jung would say, you're not lost, you're in transition. You've disidentified from the ego without yet discovering how to live from the self. This space isn't failure, it is a rite of passage. But in our hyper-productive culture, stillness gets misdiagnosed as laziness. Pause gets mistaken for stagnation. So you judge yourself, and that judgment obstructs the very energy your soul is attempting to reclaim. Jung had terminology for this psychological pause. He called it enantiodromia, the process where things transform into their opposite. When you awaken, your inner pendulum swings from ego, driven striving to soul-level stillness. You transition from, I must accomplish everything, to, why accomplish anything? And this swing is sacred. It is how equilibrium is restored. In mythology and ancient wisdom, this is the hermit phase, the death preceding rebirth. It is the moment the caterpillar liquefies inside the cocoon, not yet a butterfly, no longer a caterpillar, just transformation. And yes, transformation doesn't produce results. It doesn't hustle, it dissolves. This is where the ego panics. It demands action, identity, direction, but the self whispers, release. I'm constructing something deeper. Here is where contemporary spirituality often bypasses the difficult work. It teaches just follow your joy or high vibrations only. And while intention and energy matter, Carl Jung would tell you, if you avoid the darkness, you miss the treasure. Jung believed shadow integration, confronting the repressed, uncomfortable aspects of yourself, is essential for becoming whole, not optional, not supplementary. It is the fundamental curriculum of being a human soul. This sacred emptiness you're experiencing is where the unconscious finally has space to emerge. You're not failing, you're processing, and your psyche is profoundly wise. It will deliberately stall your motivation, your drive, even your access to clarity, so you're compelled to feel, witness, and reclaim what you've suppressed. That is the genuine work. And here is the beautiful paradox. When that something remarkable begins happening, motivation starts returning, but it feels fundamentally different this time. It is not anxious, it is not performative, it is not hustle. It is something more ancient and quieter, a kind of soul-guided movement that feels like remembering rather than pursuing. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as concept, but as living in a compass. So you've traversed the void, you've experienced the silence, the stillness, the profound pause, and now something new is beginning to awaken inside you. Not a dramatic revelation, not fireworks, more like a quiet inner pull, not to return to your former life, but to construct a new one. This is where the self begins speaking, not in words, but in nudges, in resonance. In what Carl Jung called the symbolic life, he believed that once the ego surrenders and the unconscious integrates, we become capable of living from somewhere deeper than personality. That is when life stops being about survival and becomes about meaning. And here is something unexpected. It is often beautifully ordinary. When the self leads, you don't hustle, you respond. You're not motivated by fear of inadequacy. You're guided by what feels aligned. You no longer chase clarity. You recognize it upon arrival. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll always feel motivated in conventional terms. You might still experience waves of fatigue, confusion, even grief that is being human. But what you won't feel is that constant sense of inner betrayal, the feeling of dragging yourself through an ill-fitting life. Instead, you might start noticing you're drawn to create. Even without an audience, you decline things that don't resonate. Even if they appear impressive, you start following your curiosity, not your checklist. You choose peace over performance. This is the new fuel. It is not adrenaline. It is alignment. Jung called this living symbolically, not in fantasy, but with soul, where you begin trusting your inner imagery, dreams, synchronicities, intuitive feelings as guidance. So what does this look like practically? Sometimes it is as simple as asking different questions. Instead of, what should I do? Ask, what is quietly calling me? Instead of, what is the plan? Ask, where is life guiding me? Instead of, how can I prove myself? Ask, what feels authentic? You begin participating with life instead of attempting to control it. And this doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means transforming it. Ambition becomes devotion to truth, to presence, to growth. And ironically, that kind of energy accomplishes far more effectively than ego ever could. But now it is sustainable. Now it is soul-powered. This is the self's motivation. Not to impress, but to express, and it often leads you to create, serve, heal, teach, and build. Not because you should, but because your entire being responds. Yes. So if you've been feeling like your spark vanished after awakening, understand the old fire burned out so you could discover a deeper flame, one that doesn't flicker when external winds blow. Carl Jung didn't promise an easy journey. And if you're here, Listening to this, you're already walking that path. It is not about recovering your old motivation. It is about discovering a new one rooted in wholeness, not performance. This isn't the conclusion of your awakening. It is the beginning of your becoming. If this resonated with you, if it helped you name something you've been silently navigating, leave a comment below. I'd genuinely like to hear what this journey has felt like for you. And if you want more content like this, where we explore psychology, soul, and self-awareness in ways that actually apply to real life, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom, because awakening isn't the end of the story. It is where the real story begins.